The first thing he noticed was the way she walked, slow, uneven, as if the desert itself were dragging her back. At first, Caleb Rhodes thought she was a mirage, another cruel trick of heat and loneliness. The sun was sinking, the sky bleeding orange and red, and no one survived wandering alone out here. No one should have been alive at all. But she kept moving, one bare foot in front of the other, a thin figure wrapped in rags, dust clinging to her like a second skin. When she collapsed, face first into the sand, Caleb stopped his horse without thinking. Something in his chest tightened, sharp and sudden, as if fate itself had grabbed him by the shirt and refused to let go. Caleb had lived on the edge of the desert most of his life. He knew its rules. Help could cost you everything, and hesitation could cost someone else their life. He dismounted and approached carefully, rifle slung over his shoulder. When he turned her over, he saw how young she was, no more than 20, maybe younger, and how empty her eyes looked. Her hair was tangled and cut unevenly, as if hacked away in anger. Deep marks circled her wrists, raw and infected, and her lips were cracked with thirst. She flinched when he touched her, a small sound escaping her throat, half fear, half pain. That sound alone told him everything. This woman hadn't wandered into the desert. She had been cast into it. He gave her water slowly, holding the canteen to her mouth, speaking softly even though he wasn't sure she understood English. Her eyes fluttered open, dark and wary, scanning him like a trapped animal. When she tried to pull away, her strength failed, and she sagged against his arm. Caleb swore under his breath, not at her, but at whoever had done this. He lifted her carefully onto his horse and turned back toward his ranch, the sun disappearing behind the dunes as if the desert itself were closing its eyes. Her name, he learned days later, was Naya. She spoke little at first, and when she did, it was in broken English learned through cruelty rather than kindness. She was Apache, taken months earlier by men who trafficked in human lives as easily as cattle. They had worked her, beaten her, starved her, and when she fell ill and slowed them down, they left her to die. She told this without tears, her voice flat, as if grief had burned itself out long before she reached the desert. Caleb listened in silence, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. He had seen violence in his life, fistfights, gunfights, men who died hard deaths, but this was different. This was a quiet, calculated evil that lingered long after the wounds healed. Helping her was not easy. Naya woke screaming some nights, thrashing as if still bound, her eyes unfocused and wild. She refused to eat unless Caleb stepped back, and even then she flinched at every sound. The ranch hands whispered, some with suspicion, others with fear. An Apache woman on a white ranch was an invitation for trouble, especially in a territory where hatred traveled faster than truth. Caleb heard the rumors in town, the looks that lingered too long, the voices that dropped when he walked by. He knew what people thought, that she was dangerous, that she didn't belong, that helping her would only bring ruin. Trouble came sooner than he hoped. One afternoon, 3 men rode up to the ranch, dust trailing behind them like a warning. Caleb recognized them instantly. They were the kind of men who smiled without warmth, whose eyes measured everything in terms of profit. One of them glanced past Caleb and locked eyes on Naya, who stood frozen in the doorway. The smile he gave her made Caleb's blood run cold. He knew then they had found her. They claimed ownership, speaking as if Naya were livestock that had wandered off. Caleb felt something inside him snap. He told them to leave, his hand resting near his holster, his voice steady despite the storm raging in his chest. They laughed, reminding him of the law, or lack of it, and promising they'd be back with papers and guns. When they rode away, Caleb knew his quiet life was over. That night, he sat at his kitchen table long after the lamps burned low. He had always believed in minding his own business, in surviving by staying small and unnoticed. But when he looked at Naya, sitting across from him, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug as if it were an anchor to this world, he understood something he had avoided his whole life. Some lines, once crossed, demanded a stand. If he did nothing, the desert would claim her again, this time through men instead of sand. Caleb rode to town the next morning and spoke to anyone who would listen. He found a lawyer who still believed in justice, a preacher who remembered compassion, and a few old ranchers who'd seen enough cruelty to know when to push back. It wasn't easy. Threats followed him home. Shots were fired into his fence one night. Naya begged him, in a shaking voice, to let her go, to save himself. She said she was used to running, used to losing. Caleb knelt in front of her and told her something no one ever had, that her life was not a burden, and that she didn't have to earn the right to be safe. When the men returned, they didn't come alone. But neither did Caleb. The standoff was short and ugly, words turning to gunfire in the open dirt road. When it ended, 2 men were wounded, 1 was arrested, and the rest fled. The town, forced to look at what had been hiding in plain sight, could no longer pretend ignorance. Papers were filed. Testimonies were given. Naya stood in a courtroom days later, her voice trembling but unbroken, and told the truth. The truth was enough. Healing did not come all at once. It arrived in small moments, the first time Naya slept through the night, the first time she laughed at something simple, the day she rode a horse across open land with the wind in her hair. She began to help on the ranch, not because she was expected to, but because she wanted to feel useful, rooted. Caleb watched her grow stronger, not just in body, but in spirit. She taught him words in her language, stories of her people, memories that had survived even the worst pain. Months passed. The desert remained harsh, the world still unfair, but something had changed. Where there had been fear, there was trust. Where there had been silence, there was song. Naya was no longer a shadow moving across the sand. She was a woman reclaiming her name, her past, and her future. And Caleb, once a man content to live alone, found his life widened in ways he had never imagined. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the land gold, Naya stood beside Caleb on the porch. She told him she would always remember the day he stopped his horse, the day he chose not to look away. Caleb said nothing, because he knew the truth ran deeper than words. Saving her had saved something in him too, a belief that even in the cruelest places, kindness could still take root. The desert did not change. But the people who walked through it did. And sometimes, all it took to give someone a new life was one person willing to stop, to see, and to fight for what was right.